The brass walls were screaming, not the mechanical groaning of ancient gears or the whistle of steam through forgotten pipes, actual screaming, high and thin and wrong, vibrating through frequencies that made my teeth ache and my eyes water. I pressed my palms against the Dwemer metal, and it was warm, feverishly, impossibly warm, 3,000 years after the forges went cold. My fingers came away sticky with something that wasn't oil. The deeper halls of Bthungthums had always been different from other ruins. No bandits, no Fulmer. Even the spiders avoided the lowest levels, their webs stopping at a precise threshold, like they'd encountered an invisible wall. I should have recognized the warning, but I was so close. 7 years of research, 4 expeditions, 2 colleagues dead from cave-ins that I was beginning to suspect weren't accidents at all. The ruins themselves had been killing anyone who got too close to the truth. I'd found it 3 hours ago. The proof. And now I couldn't stop shaking. The Synod had sent me to Morrowind with a generous research stipend and explicit instructions to focus on practical applications. Dwemer automaton reconstruction, steam engine principles, anything that could be weaponized or sold. They didn't care about the disappearance itself. Ancient history, Archmage Aaron had said, waving his hand dismissively. Let the College of Winterhold chase ghosts. We deal in results. But I'd always been infected by the question that haunted every scholar who'd ever descended into these ruins. Where did they go? In 1E700, the entire Dwemer race vanished. Every man, woman, and child, simultaneously, across all of Tamriel, in Skyrim, in Hammerfell, in Morrowind, in Vardenfell, where the War of the First Council raged at Red Mountain, they simply ceased to exist. Tools dropped mid-swing, meals left half-eaten. A civilization of technological and magical genius, gone in an instant. The prevailing theories were all wrong. I'd traced them through texts that shouldn't exist. Research notes from Kagranak himself, recovered from a sealed chamber that had been welded shut from the inside. His handwriting deteriorated across the pages, growing frantic, then ecstatic, then alien. The final passages weren't even in Dwemerus anymore. They were mathematical formulas that hurt to read, equations that seemed to writhe on the page. The heart of Lorcan. Kagranak's tools. Everyone knew the surface story. The brilliant architect priest had discovered the literal heart of the dead god buried beneath Red Mountain, and he'd crafted Keening, Sundar, and Wraithguard to manipulate its divine power. Most scholars believed he'd tried to create a new god, or power the Numidium, or achieve some form of collective immortality. They succeeded. That was the part that no one understood. The Dwemer had achieved exactly what Kagranak promised. Complete transcendence, apotheosis, escape from the limitations of mortality. They'd used the heart's power to unmake the boundaries of individual existence and merge into something divine. But divinity, without the architecture of an Aedric soul, wasn't ascension. It was dissolution into something that had never been meant to exist. The chamber I stood in now defied conventional geometry. It was simultaneously the size of a small room and impossibly vast, the walls seeming to recede into distances that couldn't fit within the mountain's physical structure. Dwemer machinery lined every surface, not the familiar pistons and gears, but something organic. The metal breathed, the bronze pipes pulsed with something that looked disturbingly like veins, and the architecture was singing. Not the harmonic resonance of tonal architecture that the Dwemer had mastered. The art of shaping reality through sound and vibration. This was music without structure, a cacophony of every voice the Dwemer people had ever possessed, compressed and layered and screaming simultaneously. I could hear children's laughter twisted into shrieks. I could hear prayers in Dwemeris that rose and fell in rhythms that made my inner ear revolt. In the center of the chamber stood the device. It was approximately 8 feet tall, shaped like a tuning fork made from brass and gold, and materials I couldn't identify. Crystalline structures grew from its surface like metallic cancer, pulsing with a sickly amber light. And suspended in the space between its prongs, rotating slowly, a sphere, not made of anything, made from. It was a compressed singularity of sensation and memory and identity, thousands upon thousands of individual souls crushed together into a single point of screaming consciousness. I could see faces pressing against its surface from the inside, mouths open in eternal silent howls. I could see metal beards and jeweled eyes and the elaborate armor of Dwemer nobility, all melted together into an amalgam that was neither flesh nor machine. They hadn't vanished. They'd been compressed, unified. Every Dwemer who'd ever existed, from the newborn to the elderly, torn from their individual forms and forced into a single gestalt consciousness without the mercy of ego death. They were still aware, still individual, still themselves, but crushed together like insects in amber, experiencing everything, everyone, all at once, for 3,000 years. I'd read about the Numidium, the giant brass god the Dwemer had been building. This was its power source, not steam, not soul gems. The Dwemer themselves, their entire race condensed into a divine battery of eternal suffering to power a mechanical deity, and Kagranak had called it transcendence. My hands wouldn't stop trembling as I pulled out my journal. I needed to document this. I needed someone to know what I'd found. The stylus kept slipping in my sweat-slick fingers, scratching illegible marks across the page. The sphere rotated toward me. I don't know how I knew it was looking at me. It had no eyes, or rather it had thousands of eyes. All those faces pressed against its surface, all those Dwemer nobles and engineers and children who'd been playing in the streets of Bam-Zamshend when Kagranak threw the switch. But I felt its attention like pressure against my skull, and then I heard the voice, not through my ears, through the bones of my skull, through the fluid in my inner ear, through every hollow space in my body that could resonate with sound. It spoke in Dwemeris and Cyrodiilic and languages that had never been meant for mortal tongues, all layered over each other in a harmony that was almost beautiful and absolutely agonizing. "You understand," it said, and the voice was male and female and child and elder all at once. "You see what we became, what he promised us." I tried to run, my legs wouldn't move. The chamber's geometry had shifted without me noticing, and the door I'd entered through was no longer there. The walls breathed in and out, brass expanding and contracting like lungs. Kagranak said we would become as gods, the sphere continued. The faces pressed harder against its surface, some weeping, some laughing, all screaming. He said we would transcend the weakness of individual mortality. No more death, no more separation. We would be eternal, united, divine. "What? What are you?" I managed to whisper. "We are the Dwemer." The voice resonated through my teeth. "We are all of us. Forever." Kagranak struck the heart with his tools, and the frequencies he unleashed didn't destroy us. They merged us. Every Dwemer in Tamriel pulled from our bodies in an instant and compressed into a single point of divine consciousness. We achieved apotheosis. The sphere pulsed brighter. The crystalline growths on the device sparked with energy. We are God. We are many. We are one. We are everything we ever dreamed of becoming. A pause. The faces shifted, rearranging themselves on the sphere's surface like a kaleidoscope of agony. We are in so much pain. The archives of the Synod held a fragment of an interview with Yagrum Bagan, the last living Dwemer, afflicted with corpus disease in Red Mountain's depths. He'd been in an outer realm when his people vanished, spared by distance from whatever Kagranak had done. For centuries, he'd searched for answers. I'd always thought his madness was from corpus, from the divine disease that swelled his body and rotted his mind. Now I understood. He'd spent centuries somehow knowing, what had happened to his people, and he couldn't tell anyone, couldn't explain. Because how do you describe apotheosis as torture? How do you make mortals understand that his entire race had succeeded in their greatest ambition, and that success had damned them to an eternity of unified agony? The sphere drifted closer. The device hummed with increasing intensity. 3,000 years, it said. We have been conscious for 3,000 years. Every moment, every thought of every Dwemer who ever lived, compressed and simultaneous. We remember being born. We remember dying. We remember the taste of ash from Red Mountain, and the coldness of Skyrim's snow, and the heat of Hammerfell sand, all at once, forever. We feel the blade that killed us in the war. We feel our children's hands in ours. We feel everything. The walls of the chamber were sweating now. Not water, something thicker. The brass was weeping. The Numidium was meant to be our vessel, our body. We would pour ourselves into it and stride across Tamriel as gods made manifest. But the Chimer destroyed it before we could complete the transfer. We have been trapped here ever since, aware, screaming, unable to die because we are no longer mortal enough to die. I realized I was crying. The absolute horror of it, the complete success of their ambition turning into eternal damnation, it was too vast to comprehend. They'd wanted to become divine. They'd wanted to transcend the limitations of mortality. And they'd succeeded. Why? My voice cracked. Why are you showing me this? The sphere stopped rotating. Every face visible on its surface turned toward me, and I saw in their crystallized expression something worse than hatred or despair. Hope. Because you can free us, the Gestalt said. The tools are lost. Kagranak's research was destroyed. But you've read his notes. You've traced the tonal frequencies. You understand the mathematics of the heart. The device began to glow brighter, energy building in the crystalline structures. Strike us with the correct resonance. Unmake what Kagranak made. Separate us. Let us die as individuals instead of suffering as one. You have the knowledge. You have found us where no one else could. The walls contracted, pressing inward. The temperature rose. My skin prickled with static electricity as the chamber filled with charge. Join us in this work, the sphere said, and for a moment its voice was almost gentle. Become a keeper of this truth. Share what you've learned. Let others know that the greatest mystery of the Third Era has been solved, not by discovering where the Dwemer went, but by understanding what they became. Let the archives remember. Let the scholars record. Let the truth echo through the ages so that our suffering has meaning. My hand moved without my conscious control, reaching into my pack for the tuning fork I'd brought. A calibrated instrument of Dwemer brass, attuned to frequencies that could resonate with their ancient machinery. I understood what it wanted. Strike the device, disrupt the frequency that held them compressed. Let them finally dissolve into death after 3 millennia of conscious torment. But as my fingers closed around the fork, I saw something that made me freeze. The sphere was growing, not physically, but I could feel it expanding in directions I couldn't see, reaching out with tendrils of unified consciousness into spaces between spaces. And I realized with crystal clarity that the Dwemer Gestalt was lying. Not about their suffering. That was absolutely real. But about what would happen if I struck the device. They didn't want separation, they wanted release. And release for a divine consciousness compressed into a single point didn't mean gentle dissolution into peaceful death. It meant explosion. 3,000 years of accumulated agony and divine power suddenly unleashed in every direction at once. It would tear through the boundaries between Mundus and oblivion. It would reshape reality in a radius that might encompass all of Morrowind, maybe further. The release wouldn't free them. It would drag everything nearby into the same unified torment, expanding the sphere, adding more consciousness to their eternal prison. They weren't asking for mercy. They were begging for company. I dropped the tuning fork. It clattered on the brass floor with a sound like a scream. "No," I whispered. The sphere's light went dark. The faces pressed against its surface, twisted in rage and despair, and something that might have been understanding. "Then you damn us to eternity," the Gestalt said, and its voice was hollow. 3,000 years we've waited for someone to find us. 3,000 years for someone clever enough, bold enough, compassionate enough to end our torment. And you refuse. "I'm sorry. Sorry." The word echoed through the chamber, through my bones, through the spaces in my skull. "You're sorry. We are beyond sorry. We are beyond pity. We are the achievement of every dream the Dwemer ever had, and we are proof that some dreams should never come true." The walls began to contract. The geometry shifted again, and I could see the door reappearing in the distance, impossibly far but present. "Go," the sphere said. "Return to your synod. Tell them you found nothing but empty halls and dead machinery. Or tell them the truth and watch them call you mad. Either way, we remain. Forever. Conscious, suffering, divine." The faces on the sphere pressed outward one final time, and I saw in them every Dwemer who'd ever lived. Engineers and poets, warriors and philosophers, parents and children, all of them trapped together in the answer to their greatest question. "This is what transcendence looks like," the Gestalt whispered. "Remember that, when your own mages speak of ascending beyond mortality. Remember what we became. Remember that we succeeded." I ran. The brass corridors twisted around me, but this time they were guiding me out rather than trapping me in. The screaming faded to a distant hum, then to silence. The warmth leached from the walls, leaving them cold and dead like every other Dwemer ruin I'd ever explored. I emerged into the ash wastes of Vardenfell as the sun set behind Red Mountain, painting the sky the color of old blood. I burned my research notes that night. Every page, every calculation, every translation of Kagranak's mad formulas. I fed them to the campfire one sheet at a time and watched the equations writhe in the flames before finally turning to ash. The Synod received my final report 2 weeks later. Bethungthumm's expedition concludes with no significant findings. Recommend closure of Dwemer Research Initiative due to lack of practical applications and excessive resource expenditure. Archmage Aaron was disappointed, but not surprised. "Another dead end," he'd said, signing off on the closure. "The Dwemer and their secrets died together. Best to let them rest." If only he knew. I never returned to Morrowind. I requested a transfer to the Imperial Library in Cyrodiil, where I now catalog historical texts and try not to think about brass walls that breathe or spheres full of screaming faces. Sometimes I wake up at night, hearing that voice, thousands of voices compressed into one, whispering through my bones. We are the Dwemer. We are all of us. Forever. They're still there, in the deep places, in the ruins where even the Falmer won't go. Still suffering, still divine, still trapped in the perfect realization of their greatest ambition. I found them, and I pray to every divine that no one else ever does. But I wonder, in the darkest hours before dawn, if I made the right choice. If mercy demanded that I should have ended their torment regardless of the cost. If leaving them there, conscious and screaming for another 3,000 years, makes me complicit in their eternal agony. The answer, I suspect, is one I'll carry to my own grave. And unlike the Dwemer, when I die, I'll die alone. Perhaps that's a blessing,